thank you. Thank you, Andrew, for hosting this, and thanks to all the organizers and the previous speakers. In keeping with the theme of scarcity and abundance, I'd like to talk about intellectual scarcity and abundance, and particularly what's happening globally with languages. There are 7,000 languages spoken in the world, and this represents the greatest repository of human knowledge ever assembled. But they are rapidly going extinct and eroding under various pressures of globalization, which I will talk about today. And this loss will be catastrophic for humanity, both in terms of science and technology and culture, and not just to the people who speak these languages, but to all of us. My work has been in tracking global trends of language extinction. And this map gives you a sense of how unevenly distributed languages are around the planet. Differences that we find among human languages are vast. They're not just a question of using different sounds to say the same things, but we're looking at entire conceptual universes of thought. Each language has infinite expressive possibilities, infinite combinatorial possibilities in its grammar, and in the way that it can package information and concepts. So the ingenuity and wisdom that we're seeing here in what I call the human knowledge base is under threat. And I'd like to talk today about why languages are going extinct, where languages are going extinct, and why this matters to all of us. And I'd like to give you two perspectives on the problem, a global and a local perspective. The local perspective will come in the voices of some of the very last speakers of the world's most endangered languages, and I will be playing some video clips for you today. And the global perspective is my own as a scientist, a concerned scientist tracking this trend and thinking about what can we do to sustain linguistic diversity on the planet before it disappears. Starting with the local perspective, I'd like to just play for you a little clip. This is a lady named Hannah Cooper. She lives in South Africa, and she is one of the 8 remaining speakers of a language called Nu. And I'd like you to just listen to her own words, her own perspective on this issue.
C'est con, c'est quoi, c'est nu, c'est con, c'est nu, c'est rien, c'est quoi. Ah, mình cái này mà gì, cái cái. Không có giống một cái hộp bún cả. Không phải nó không thoáng mình cái. À lại không, ôi, thôi chả. Cái khăn rung.
So what does it matter if Mu and languages like it go to sleep, if they go extinct? And how are we all impoverished by this extinction? We live in the digital age, and we like to imagine, we have this kind of fantasy that any information that is useful is available to us somewhere in writing, in some book or library or database, or it can be Googled. That's not true. And in fact, we're facing an immense knowledge gap. Most of the world's languages have never been written down anywhere. They have not been recorded. They have not been adequately documented from a scientific point of view. And so as they vanish, we will have literally no record of them and all of the ideas and thoughts and technologies that they contain. At least half of the world's languages, 3,586, are endangered and potentially will go extinct in this century. And the distribution of languages around the world is highly skewed, is highly uneven. 83% of the world's languages account for nearly 80% of the world's population. And I would draw your attention to the base of the inverted pyramid. 3,586 of the world's smallest languages are spoken by just 0.2% of the world's population. That is an incredibly uneven distribution of knowledge. And the people who are in the tip of the pyramid there are facing intense pressures to abandon their languages.
What? My language, I'm Adawiji.
My job as a linguist, and in collaboration here with my colleague Greg Anderson, who's also a linguist, and with support from National Geographic Society and from our own foundation, the Living Tongues Institute for Endangered Languages, our job is to go around the world to visit these last speakers of languages, talk with them, hear their stories. And it's been an immense honor and privilege to sit with these speakers and have them share their knowledge with us. It's also a wonderful opportunity to be able to take these voices that have been so marginalized and have never been heard outside of their immediate region where they're spoken, and to bring them to a global audience and share some of that knowledge with you. Languages are much more endangered than species, and they're going extinct at a much faster rate. Some people have estimated we lose a language every 2 weeks or so. I like to think of these as parallel but interlinked extinction processes. And we face a similar scientific knowledge gap in both domains. So biologists tell us that 80% of the world's plant and animal species have not yet been named or classified or taxonomized within a Western scientific framework. And similarly, at least 80% of languages have not been documented or recorded with any degree of sufficiency. So in both of these domains, biological species and intellectual species, if you will, we don't even know what it is we're losing.
Nese achane Max Chura Mamane Kallawaya Chari Nese Sekane Kai Sikuman Pacha Kuchaita Sejo.
Now, species of plants and animals that aren't known yet to Western scientists are, of course, intimately known by the people who live in these ecosystems. And the Kalawaya people of Bolivia, that's the language that you just heard, spoken by this young man, Ilarion Zamos Condori. Kalawaya is an excellent example of the fragility of the human knowledge base. The Kalawaya know the uses and medicinal purposes of thousands of plants that they have been experimenting with over centuries. They are expert pharmacologists, and they invented their language as a secret language to encode pharmacological knowledge, and they have passed it on successfully over the centuries with a very small speaker base, now fewer than 100 people. I could multiply examples like this around the world. The Yupik of Alaska have 99 complex descriptive terms for describing different formations of sea ice. And this is a technology that has aided them in hunting and in surviving in one of the harshest environments. It has also attuned their cultures to be one of the most sensitive instruments to detect the signs of climate change and global warming, if their culture can survive intact. I could also mention the Morovo of the Solomon Islands, who are fish experts and know more about the behavioral ecology of fish in their environment than what marine biologists know. We're facing now what I call the triple threat of extinction. We know that species and ecosystems are in collapse globally, and we've heard some wonderful presentations today about the oceans. Knowledge systems about those species and ecosystems are also in collapse because they are often contained in small languages that are purely transmitted orally and have not been written down. So these three domains of the knowledge base, the language base, and species and ecosystems are deeply interlinked. Apart from scientific concerns, language extinction is also a deeply personal issue for many of the people that I have had the privilege of interviewing over the years. And this lady, Marta Kangarayeva, who is a speaker of the Tofa language, she told me once, quote, "Soon I'll go berry picking, and when I go, I'll take my language with me," end quote. So Marta's view is a very personal one, and it really reflects the end of the line for this language. Marta's people are hunter-gatherers and reindeer herders, and they have survived in one of the harshest environments in the world, in the middle of Siberia, incredibly remote, a place so remote you can only get there during certain seasons of the year by helicopter. They know everything there is to know about their environment. What is it exactly that they're losing as the language goes extinct? Marta's son, Sergei Kongarayev, shown here, and her grandchildren are not speakers of the language anymore. So what exactly have they lost? I'll tell you a couple of things they've lost. They had a creation myth that involved the world coming out of a duck's egg. That's been forgotten. They had a lunar calendar that very precisely linked up the seasons, the astronomical events, and the plant and animal cycles, and that was more precise than our solar calendar and didn't need to be reset every 4 years with a leap year. They've lost that. They had a linguistically encoded mental map of their terrain that was more precise than anything cartographers have produced using satellite photographs for their territory. And they had a wonderful classification system for reindeer, which separated reindeer, classified them along 4 parameters. Now, it's a fair question to ask, why can't all this knowledge just be translated into English and exploited within a global monolingual culture? And it's true, I could take a word like eder in their language, which means a 4-year-old male, uncastrated, domesticated, rideable reindeer. And I can express that concept in English. I just did. But languages are the product of millennia of fine-grained and sophisticated observation and packaging of information into hierarchies and taxonomies. Any of you have ever gotten 1 million hits for your Google search and have been frustrated by that result? Understand the value of structured information, of folksonomies. These languages are like trees. They organize information. When people shift over to speaking global languages, it all gets flattened out into a puddle. Working with the National Geographic Society and building on this biological metaphor of threatened biodiversity, I coined the term language hotspots. And we have a project which is designed to identify the global language hotspots and help prioritize and focus research on them. We look for 3 criteria in identifying a hotspot. First, where are the highest levels of linguistic diversity? And here, we're not just counting sheer numbers of languages, but we're counting numbers of language families. So we're looking at a deeper level of diversity. Secondly, where are the highest levels of language endangerment around the globe? And thirdly, where are the lowest levels of scientific knowledge and documentation about those languages? So where we have a convergence of 3 factors, high diversity, high endangerment, low scientific knowledge, we have a hotspot. We've located about 24 hotspots so far, and some surprising results have popped out. Bolivia, with its population of under 9 million people, has 3 times the linguistic diversity of all of Europe. Oklahoma is a language hotspot. We're mapping this data into a richly interactive website, and with some assistance from the experts at National Geographic Maps, we're able to plot these hotspots. So we're looking here at the Central Siberia language hotspot with 20 languages belonging to 6 language families, and you can see them clustering together. This material also goes into a richly interactive website so that you can navigate the world, visit the language hotspots, zoom in, explore, hear and see some of the speakers, and appreciate some of the knowledge that they have. I'd like to invite you to come with me to Central Siberia right now as we zoom into one of these remote locations. And using GPS technology, we're able to pinpoint very precisely, in some cases, the exact location of every single speaker of a language, as I've done with the Chulim language of Siberia. A couple of years ago, I brought together 3 elders of the Chulim community, and I asked them to sit down and have some conversations about things that were culturally important to them. And I'd like us to just kind of listen into their conversation for a minute. And I want to impress on you that, well, human conversation is perhaps the most banal event in our daily life. In this language, Chulim, it is a rare novelty because none of the speakers live in households or communities where it's spoken. So I had to bring these speakers from great distances to be together just to have a conversation.
Ai, pistengaya kaito woto, tungguai bolgan kaito.
Sekarang belum sih kaito pisting
Pistengdela ai.
Kaito kala tulukaya, kusukanaya, karkaya, kuokaya eta maya, manana kuokaya maya.
Kuokaya.
No, amta kainar. Parçayın bilgim, adam sepes bilgim.
Man тоже билгем.
Ay,
Наузу погагнер поэтому.
Конечно.
So this is a little vignette of cultural forgetting and of the erosion of the human knowledge base. And what is it that we can salvage from what's left of some of these languages? As a scientist, I can make high-quality digital recordings, I can archive them, I can share them, I can do scientific analysis of the acoustics or the grammatical structures, and you see all of this wrapped in kind of a scientific analytical framework here. But as an ethical scientist, I also want to do something to feed back into the community. What does the community want? What are their strategies for the survival of their language? In the case of the Chulim people, their language had never been written down before. But one of the members of the community had invented his own writing system. And so we took his writing system, which was very unique and innovative, and at the request of the community, we produced a storybook, which will be the first book ever published in the language. And this is a way that the science can feed back into the community and can support their own efforts at language revitalization. Looking around the globe, there's a very exciting movement for language revitalization that's taking place right now. And with support from National Geographic and from the Living Tongues Institute, we're working to support these efforts by putting technology kits into these communities, training and expertise and support so that they can revitalize and sustain their own languages. And I want to give credit here to our team photographer, Chris Rainier, who took this amazing photograph. And that's a very important component of our research as well. Looking at these threatened cultures, this young man on the left, his name is Sangye Nimasao. He speaks a language in northeast India that's called Akha, and it has fewer than 2,000 speakers, and it's in steep decline among the younger generation. Now, Sangye doesn't go around dressed like this every day. He might put on these traditional clothes once or twice a year. And that tells us something about the state of the culture, but of course cultures cannot be frozen in time, and neither can languages. So what's happening with the language? Here's a picture of Sangye in his everyday clothing. And he and his friend here have come up with what I think is a brilliant strategy for saving their language. And rather than me talking about it, I'd like them to explain it to you.
Simple pani china for futanya for me futanya gijiri ne pyare ne hojara asinka pani china for futanya for me futanya gijiri ne pyare ne hojara ane na le boda jimeve ane na le boda jimeve ad du chen ba sna du chen ba pat khala mujhe trohan la tu chen ba sna tu chen ba pat khala mujhe trohan la.
I was awestruck by this, and I think what these two young men are doing is quite literally saving their language. Why would they do that? They each speak 5 languages fluently, and their heritage language, Akha, is completely useless in socioeconomic terms outside of the little mountain village where they live. And yet they have strategically chosen, by producing this brilliant verbal art, to use the language. And that will have an important effect. It will raise the prestige of the language in the eyes of 5-, 6-, and 7-year-olds who are the true decision makers in communities about whether to keep or abandon a language. And it will thus ensure the survival of the language. So I've taken you on a little tour around the globe. We've looked at a variety of small and endangered languages, where they are, why they're going extinct, why it matters, what kind of knowledge systems they contain, and how this enriches all of us if it can survive, and how it will impoverish all of us if it vanishes. I would like to take a moment just to challenge and encourage all of you. Everyone can do something to support a world in which a diversity of thought and a diversity of ways of speaking is encouraged and is fostered and is sustained. There's no reason for people to be forced to abandon their languages. It's one of the false choices of globalization to tell people that they must give up a small or a minority or a heritage language in order to speak a global language like English. It doesn't have to happen. We would all be better and smarter if the world remains multilingual. Thank you.